So next up, we have one of the sort of originators of hyperlocal, Ted Leonsis, who was in the early days of Digital Cities and AOL. His company merged to become AOL. And also Ben Smith, editor-in-chief of Buzzfeed, but perhaps more to the point, he's an advisor to the hyperlocal publishing company Corner Media. Welcome.
Thank you all for having us here. And I asked Ted in advance, he doesn't mind the memory lane aspect of this, because I did actually want to start with Digital Cities, which was, there's an article published recently saying it was this kind of too early visionary effort in hyperlocal. But I think one of the questions about that is, and I think about a lot of this space, is like kind of where the value is. Like, is it, because in my business, like people want to read about Barack Obama. And in this hyperlocal network in Brooklyn I help out with, people really care about the bagel shop on the corner. But it seems like it's been a struggle to make people care about the city, about like that level in the middle. Like the New York Daily News is struggling. You know, how do you do that? How do you kind of create that story around the city, not the neighborhood, not the big national story?
Well, we wanted to get America online back in the early 90s, and the way we built out the network was we built a private internet, and it was on dial-up. And we had to build local POPs. So we literally were putting modems in to neighborhoods so that when you could get online, you could avoid long distance charges, if you can believe it. And literally, that's how we built a private internet, and we were in every city, every community. And because we had those local exchange numbers, we started to realize that we would have a local, regional, hyperlocal, national media platform that could be built. And actually, our first investor was the Chicago Tribune, and we allowed them to do Chicago online. We did a deal with the New York Times, and when you logged on, you got a localized version of that. And so we saw through presence, which today really has become social media, where you could pulse to see where were you signing on. That was really the first time that you got online. And we'd say, this is where you're dialing in from the network. And so we launched Digital Cities, which was really the first hyper-local, local content-oriented. We also we bought MapQuest, we bought MoviePhone, because those were things that you would do locally. And we started to scale and build those businesses. And what we learned was not only was the advertising business relevant on that platform, but it was really commerce which would drive all of those businesses. And what has been shocking to me is in 25 years, the amount of money that a consumer spends within 20 miles from their home really still has stayed in around the 80% range. If you look at your checkbook, if you look at your banking statement, about 80% of every dollar you spend is within 20 miles from your home. And so it's where the money is, and that's why this industry is of such interest.
Yeah, you gave me that figure the other day. That's such an incredible number. And yet, big companies, AOL after your time with Patch, really have struggled to to turn that number into a sustainable business, much less a decent business. Why do you think that is?
Well, the first thing is that it's still an anomaly that less than 10% of that local wallet share is spent online. And so we as an industry have to take the friction out to be able to get those dollars. I think what you just saw from one of the previous speakers on beacons and real-time communiques and alerts, but there's still a lot of friction in the system to activate and be able to do local. You're going to see a lot of development. I'm early on in Groupon. We just bought a delivery company called Order Up. You're going to see a lot of work on convenience because we've become this world where 4 blocks away is too far of a walk for someone to go for lunch. mean, that's how hyper we're talking about. And delivery is becoming more and more important. I live in Washington, D.C. I've been doing a lot of work with the government on how do we make sure that delivery and drone delivery is activated and that the FAA doesn't shut down all of drones because people want their pizza now delivered by drone.
Okay, so drones are basically the one-word solution to hyperlocal. Good. That's actually what I was hoping you'd say. And yeah, you actually are involved from then until now into like so many of the key players in this space. So I have this long list of questions I will not get to in 25 minutes. But Groupon is another, and I wonder, Groupon in its earliest kind of model was seen for a while as the future of local commerce, and now that model nobody thinks is the future, but it's changed. And I wonder, I think you guys, Revolution's also invested in Living Social, right? So I guess I wonder what those businesses become.
So Groupon is obviously a very misunderstood company by Wall Street, but
media.
It's certainly understood by Main Street. This is a company that's scaled and grown very, very quickly. Perhaps it got too hyper-local, if you can believe it. At its height, the company was in 70 countries and more than 700 cities. And when you spread that thin, getting density in the amount of offers becomes difficult. We started with a pizza offer in Chicago, and now I think we offer about 200,000 offers at a time, and it's not enough. And so I believe that the platform that's been created, the 300, 400 million customers around the world and the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of offers that are happening, it's still pre-season. You have to take a long view on this, but local e-commerce will happen and will continue to grow. And Groupon is the only company that has reached some kind of scale. It's $5 billion plus in revenues, and the company is continuing to grow. But you have to take a long, long view. It's just like getting online. I remember our march to 1 million, and at 1,200 and 2,400 bought, and we just believed it'll never be cheap, it'll never be easier than it is today to get that scale, and I think that's what's going to happen in local.
You've been buying sports teams, and we were talking before, and you told me you saw that as and not as kind of a hobby separate from this interest in local, but as kind of something very closely tied to that whole space, which I thought was interesting.
Well, when you look at the demography of our planet right now, it took to 2008 for more than 50% of the population to coagulate around rural areas. I mean, we've been farmers since until 2008. And now there's this concept of the birth of super cities. And there's only 10 super cities in the world. There's 4 in the United States. New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Los Angeles. And these super cities...
I feel like Washington is sort of stretching to get into that league.
No, it's media market. Has 3 airports. It has fiber. It has a disproportionate amount of millennials moving into the city. The economy is growing quickly.
Just being parochial here.
But when you look at metro areas, there's very few iconic definers of that community. The first is universities. Universities are vital, represent longevity, IP, research dollars flow in, they create jobs, they employ lots of people. And then the students that they bring in, they fall in love with the city and they stay in that community and they try to replicate their dorm experience and all of their habits. Second is iconic real estate. I mean, just cruise around here. Every time I come to New York, I'm floored by the amount of vertical building that's going up. But still, the Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty, we've got the mall in Washington, D.C. Iconic real estate is deeply, deeply important. Third is public space. If a community doesn't have public space and public gathering space, it really, really struggles. And New York has Central Park. Chicago has great public space. We've got the mall in D.C. Fourth is a defining business community. New York's about Wall Street, and now it's trying to be about tech. LA's about Hollywood, San Francisco's about Silicon Valley. We're about the federal government and contractors. And then last is sports teams. Sports teams define a community. They're not only about the sport, but they're about the real estate. They convene. We bring 2.5 million people a year into Verizon Center to watch the Washington Capitals or the Mystics or the Wizards. We're an e-commerce platform. My teams have been the DC Chamber of Commerce Companies of the Year because they drag people in. We're the #1 Uber drop-off and pickup spot in the city. We generate within a 5-block radius about 20% of the city's tax base now around Verizon Center. So I looked at buying my sports team as it's really like a SaaS software business. We have recurring revenues, and it was all about local and social and mobile. You know, we were the first team to put beacons into the arena so we can real-time update, get people content, and update their merchandise or seats and the like. And I do think sports plays such a central role in a community's psyche and well-being.
As the owner of Washington sports franchises with like great names, like the Washington Wizards, what do you think of the Redskins? Should they change their name?
You know, I have my own problems. I don't focus on other people's.
Sorry, just figured I'd give it a shot. You talk about those 5 sort of iconic institutions. Do you think of media as sort of a psychically important local institution? I mean, I think about New York and the New York Post and the New York Daily News as having been, you know, in the way of sports teams. These things that kind of helped create the idea that this city is a thing and that are kind of falling apart. And I wonder how you see that.
You know, I think there's a debate that is being held. Is the media setting an agenda, or is the media reflecting what's out there? And I think media is falling a little bit out of pace, and that new media, you know, Buzzfeed is a good example, like it or not, really is more in tune and in touch with what matters because it's based more on the muscle memory and the habits and the click streams and the real-time zeitgeist of what's going on. I do think that new media is passé in terms of what's its business model. I mean, you know, everyone is waiting for a BuzzFeed to have its revenue meet its valuation. I mean, the Voxes of the world, I was an angel investor in Vox, and we're all rooting for the new media to make it, but the business model is yet to be proven out because so far to date, for the most part, the business model is an old business model. It's based on traffic, it's based on ad sales, and that's been one of the big disappointments that I've had as someone who's kind of been there from the birth of the industry, that we haven't done a better job in reinventing advertising, and who else can pay the freight here to make for great journalism and great media.
Yeah, that's I mean, we certainly see advertising, a new kind of it, as a great business, but it has been interesting to see Vinny Barara has these media startups, the idea of which is that they're commerce driven, which is like certainly kind of an interesting idea for media. But I do think it's, you know, that these new companies you mentioned, Us, Vox, Vice, are fundamentally kind of a national or international press, which the U.S. never had before. You had the New York Times, the Washington Post, and it does feel like they're shifting away from the cities.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking that the Washington Post's metro section is this small when it's the fastest growing community. It's one of the wealthiest communities, and it seems like that's a big business opportunity that the local newspapers have always missed. They're more interested in writing about, you know, the political situation or the world affairs for Syria right now than they are on what's going on in Bethesda or Potomac or Tyson's Corner. And so, I mean, Patch didn't make it, but I live in Potomac, Maryland. I'm really interested in what happens in my city. I go to my, Saturday mornings after I work out, I go into Potomac. My wife and I go and eat there. We go to the movies in Bethesda. And so that becomes kind of a center for our family, yet it's not treated well, it's not covered well, and there is some kind of opportunity there. Now, a lot of the new companies, like a Vox that started with SB Nation, it has 400 local sports blogs, right? And it harnessed the passion of little communities around soccer and basketball and hockey and college sports, and built those vertical networks to aggregate up a really, really big, 150, 165 million unique visitor kind of network from the bottom up. It didn't start with Vox.com coming down.
Let's see, I'm going to ask for questions just in a minute, but we've really been getting through this. You're very concise. I appreciate it. And the last thing I wanted to ask about was video. You're invested in Snag Films, which has done some very, in a way, high-profile, national, international stuff. And I wonder, what you're seeing in attempts to do video on a more local level.
Well, I actually started Snag Films because of I was shocked. I made a movie, and it won all these awards at Sundance in January, and a studio bought it, and they said, good news, we're going to show it in 3 theaters Christmas week in New York. I was like, have you seen the movie? It's a Chinese Holocaust film with subtitles. Why would you open it Christmas week? And they said, well, there's 30,000 screens in 8,000 buildings, theaters in North America, and only 500 screens will show documentary or independent film. I was shocked by that. Plus, they take your digital and they turn it into analog. I'd spent my whole life taking analog and turning it into digital. And so I said, well, I bet you I could create a way to make billions of screens. And if we could get these movies and allow people we'll stream them, people can watch the film, and if they like it, they can open their own virtual movie theater. They could snag the film and embed it into their website, into a Buzzfeed article, and it would get syndicated. More people would be able to watch that movie. And it is crazy when you think about it, the importance of a movie theater in your community. You become like a real community. We just opened a new E Street Cinema in a formerly deserted part of DC, and it was a big news article. Wow, this means the community is growing, and there's rental properties, and millennials are living there. It deserves its own theater. But that's all there are. There's 8,000 theaters in North America with 30,000 screens. And so I wanted to use the new media and allow people, when something is relevant, to be able to share it, email, messaging, or however, and we can target that and serve up the ads on a local and hyperlocal way.
Anybody have questions?
Go to Snag Films. Don't do what my mother-in-law did. Don't go to stagfilms.com.
Other than that, any other questions? Yeah, sure. We have a mic. Hang on.
So I'm actually from DC as well. But so you talked about how the Post doesn't do local articles about Bethesda, Easter Market, whatever. But I mean, and I have friends who work there, and I know they instrument the hell out of their website. So I mean, is it a cost-benefit issue for them? Because if to write that article on the Syrian refugees, they probably get thousands of clicks, whereas on Bethesda they may only get like hundreds. Is that part of it? And how do we get customers and local businesses to maybe contribute articles, perhaps?
Well, again, right now it's scale. If you just looked at how many people lived in Potomac or Bethesda, you'd say it's not worthy of having its own paper. Yet you look at where people shop, where people get their haircut, where people do their grocery shopping. It's literally inches away from your home. I mean, that's how people make their decision on whether they'll gas up in our hometown. That's why you see big data driving a lot of these decisions. I started a platform payments company, and it was acquired by American Express. And I see the information that's available on purchasing, and it's why, like a Starbucks will open a store across the street from a Starbucks. They literally can watch how people will drive by one place, and if they're coming home during rush hour, they'll make a stop here, but they won't do it in the morning in rush hour. And so local is where all of the money gets spent. But having to cover it from a media standpoint, it's why we need more. Google really is the greatest local supplier of information, and they were able to do that through a self-provisioning platform. What no one has broken the code on yet is how to get good editorial up on a hyper-local basis that kind of supersets your community and all the verticals and the like. But that has to come because people really care about their neighborhoods. People really care about their neighbors.
Yeah, I think I would add, it's something that I think that people remember a kind of glory days of Metro coverage that never happened. Like, it's certainly in this town, like the Metro papers were great, but they were covering the city hall, they were covering the citywide stories, and I think that like there are these opportunities to be more local. Like there was probably never great local coverage in Bethesda. It's not like there's some forgotten moment when it was fantastic.
Yeah, you're probably right. The good old days weren't that good. Another thing I'd say about our industry as a whole, and local is not just about online. I bought sports teams. I'm investing in new food that's all local. Sweet Green is one of our investments, and Sweet Green started in Georgetown and opened a bunch of stores in DC, and then came up to Philadelphia, then went to Boston. Now they're in New York. They just opened in LA and San Francisco, and it is programmed by the food, by the season, by the growers locally. That is an intensely local business. We just invested in a company called Bedrock Manufacturing that owns Shinola. And Shinola is an entry to luxury company. And they are opening lots of retail outlets. There's one literally right around the corner. And they are programmed intensely locally and all sourced from American made and manufactured in Detroit. But if you go to one of their stores, it's really in sync with the neighborhood and the community that it's serving. And I think that's what you'll see now. You'll see this bland national or global strategy that companies that wanted to get scale, a McDonald's, a Coca-Cola, where everything looks the same, being rejected by this new generation of people who are living their life online or living it hyper-locally, want things on demand, and want things that are catered and developed in a specific format, footprint, convenience for them locally.
Do you think there's still opportunity for a media company that has a lot of scale but that is assimilating in each of these local places in a way that's sensitive to that? Or do you think ultimately it's going to be local media companies?
I do. My bet is that there'll have to be some kind of roll-up. That's what I've been surprised at. I mean, I have a venture company. We have lots of money to invest, and I'm waiting for someone to say the way to kickstart this is to roll up a bunch of capability. Everyone is sub-optimized right now. The technology, the infrastructure, the media, the traffic, and there really needs to be some kind of rationalization, some kind of roll-up on platform, on content, on advertising, on commerce to make a nationwide shared footprint to bring costs down, but then also to aggregate up on a national basis the inventory so that you can have meaningful ad revenues, not just local search and commerce-oriented revenues.
Got time for one more question, if anybody's got one. Anyone?
Ben, you're way nicer than I was told you would be.
Well, I'm sitting in.
Everyone said you're going up to New York and you're going to be one-on-one with Ben. Are you crazy?
Well, I was hoping you would make news with the Redskins question, frankly. If you have any thoughts at all about just broadly about the portrayal of Native Americans and.
Well, we've just been told we're out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.